Hi, my name is Elaina Scott. I'm an animation lead on Supergirl for CW, but I also work on The Flash, Legends of Tomorrow, and our new show is Black Lightning, and we're also working on Teen Titans. So it's a television visual effects animation.
And you actually got your start in the video game industry.
Yes.
Talk a little about some of the early games you were able to work on.
So my very first game was my second year. I went to Cal Arts, and every summer I managed to get some kind of job. So my first job was working on the South Park movie, and then the next year I worked at Variant Games, which is now Sony Online, and I worked on the Star Wars Galaxies game. Got to do some concept art on it. I got to imagine what a female Wookiee would look like. It's basically a Wookiee with a bikini top and like curly hair, I don't know. And then my next game right out of school was X-Men Next Dimension, and then I worked on the first Backyard Wrestling game. Then I got laid off, and then I went and worked at Genuine Games on a really crappy Fight Club game. They are the people who ended up doing the 50 Cent game. I wasn't there for that, but and then I worked on the Fantastic Four game in 2004, 2003, 2004. And after that, I went on to work on Star Wars Battlefront 2 for the Xbox and PS2. It's fun fact, it was a very small animation team. It was me and one animation lead, and he basically let me animate almost he wanted to do Darth Vader, so I was like, you got it. But then I got to do like General Grievous and Darth Maul and like all the Jedis and all the creatures. I got to animate the Rancor, so I got to put my stamp on a lot of stuff on that game, which was really cool.
And you got a lot of Star Wars and comic book stuff out of the way early on in video games.
Yeah. In fact, working on Star Wars Galaxies, before I got there and they didn't have my machine ready, so they just had me do concept art, and they basically pulled out like a ton of like encyclopedias of the Star Wars universe, and so I'm like learning about all of these obscure, alien races and the history of this and that or whatever. And so I was so well versed in Star Wars stuff that I knew more than the guys at school did, because I spent a whole summer studying it.
And now it's come full circle with comic books, because you now have Injustice video games based on characters that you guys are creating in the TV shows.
Yes. Warner Brothers is doing quite a good job of tying everything that it's doing together, So it's I feel like we're gonna have a long-lived run on the CW, because we're basically marketing for Warner Brothers' other properties, you know what I mean? And I mean, we have a fan base, people like the shows, especially The Flash. My favorite show of the three, even though I'm supervising on Supergirl, is Legends of Tomorrow, because for me it's like Doctor Who with superheroes, and it's only gonna get wackier this season. If you thought last season was wacky, this season's wackier. They're just going full crazy, which I love. And then Flash is going to get funnier this year. I think people thought last year it was a little bit too, so they're lightening things up a little bit this season. So.
Well, I mean, that's the thing with comic books. I mean, even back with the original Batman, it does have something about it when you acknowledge the humor, right?
Right. Yeah. I think that the first season of Legends of Tomorrow was a little bit too melodramatic, and everybody, even on the client side and Warner Brothers and CW, recognized that, and that's why they decided to go sillier with it. And it's been a much more successful going silly. So I appreciate the silly side of things. It's really fun to be able to have I have a bunch of Alex Ross books at work that I constantly look at for pose reference and, just to get inspired. And I have tons of comic books at my desk and stuff, because sometimes you're just trying to figure out a new pose for Supergirl to float in. So you look at one of the new 52s and just, okay, I like that pose. Or, when she's fighting, I want to come up with a cool dynamic pose. So I look at the comics. And it's also fun to familiarize yourself with this wider universe. I have a DC encyclopedia, and I'm always when I see a new episodes coming out, I'll read a script and be like, who is that character? And look it up and just start familiarizing it. It's a fun thing to research. So.
How are you also seeing your two worlds come full circle, in that it seems like there's a lot more video game engine technology being used by Hollywood for previs, and even like the last Star Wars movie actually had actual sequences that were in
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
like
for sure.
K2SO.
We don't do that so much at our place just because we have to do things so quickly. We have to turn around an episode in 3 or 4 weeks, so we don't have the time to be like pulling out game engines and stuff like that. But I have worked with game engines for like VR as well as for previs, and I've used virtual sets. I worked on Hunger Games, Mockingjay Part 2, and we used a virtual set we worked on this scene towards the end of the movie where her spoiler alert, her sister dies. But yeah, it's kind of exciting because I know I have that background, and if I ever wanted to get back into doing previs with real-time rendering engines, I know how to use Unreal 4, I know how to use Unity. I could probably jump into Crytek if I needed to, because at the end of the day, under the hood, they really all do the same thing. They just have their own like separate language for what they call things and where they put things, but they all do the same thing. So if you learn how to do it in one, you figure it out how to do it in the other. And then with my knowledge of like camera work and stuff like that, I could probably pretty easily jump back into doing real-time rendering previs. I'm not doing that currently because that's not, our production just doesn't allow for it. So we do everything in Maya.
I know you're now obviously working with DC, but having done stuff in the Marvel universe as well, do you have a preference having been on both sides?
I will say this, I prefer the Marvel movies, but I really love working on the TV shows. I feel like Greg Berlanti and his group have a real knack for casting the perfect people to play. Because I know when they first said they were casting Melissa Benoist to play Supergirl, I wasn't really that familiar with her. I hadn't seen the season of Glee that she was on. I was kind of like, really? I don't see it. But then when we got the plates for the pilot and I was watching her in motion and acting the character, like I was like, this girl is amazing. And the first thing my boss, Armin Kevorkian, said to me was the country's gonna fall in love with her. Like, she's awesome. And I mean, he'd met her because he was the effects supervisor on the pilot. But you know, he could see it in her too, and it's the same thing with Grant Gustin, who plays Barry. Like, the guy is just so charming, and Cisco is so charming, and all the, you know, like, they did a really great job of picking the right actors to play these roles. And I just love watching, because we get to watch kind of the footage coming from the client before we put the effects in it, so a lot of times I'll watch the episodes before they air, and I'm just laughing my ass off sometimes, and I'm like, I can't wait for people to see this. It's so funny. Like, I can't say anything about it, but the crossover event this year is going to be great, and the intro to each episode is going to be really funny, and I can't say any more than that, but I was laughing at my desk. I'm like, I can't wait for people to see this.
and these days it's challenging just because you've got all the CW stuff, you have all the Netflix stuff, you have all the separate movie stuff. I mean, it takes up a lot of time now to be a superhero fan.
I know. I'm kind of like dreading the idea that maybe the superhero bubble is going to burst or something, but I'm hoping that people still have an appetite for it, because I feel like the Marvel Netflix shows are so different than what we do that there's room for both. It's kind of like, depends on, you know, are you into dark and gritty, or are you into like kind of the more Silver Age goofiness, like, and that's kind of what we do. So, like, I love the characters on all the shows. Like, I love that they made Alex gay and that her girl, like, I actually wrote a spec script of Supergirl for the fun of it, just to see, you know, and like, I'm so well versed in the characters now because they've done such a good job of really defining the characters, and they have such a great chemistry with each other. And even when they cross over to each other's shows, they all of these actors have great chemistry with each other. So I think that there's room for everybody, you know.